The candle flames in Lord Hartwell's ballroom guttered and spat as the crush of 200 bodies pressed close. It was the 15th of April, 1816. Outside, an unseasonable frost still silvered the streets of Mayfair, but inside Berkeley Square the heat was oppressive. Beeswax, pomade, French perfume, and the faint metallic scent of anxious sweat. Miss Penelope Wright had retreated to the small anteroom off the main saloon for air when she heard the voice she knew too well. Mr. Julian Thorne stood not 10 feet away, half hidden by a marble column, laughing with two of his cronies. His golden hair caught the light. His evening coat of midnight blue superfine sat upon shoulders that had once been praised in every drawing room from Grosvenor Square to Portman Square. The Tun's golden boy, the man whose essays in the Quarterly Review were quoted at every breakfast table. "And that latest volume by Miss Amelia Langford," Thorne was saying, voice lazy with contempt. "Sentimental nonsense. Schoolroom verses that would not survive a single recitation without giggles. One wonders why any publisher troubles himself with such drivel." Penelope's fan snapped shut with a crack like a pistol shot. She stepped forward, kid slippers silent on the Axminster carpet. Her white muslin gown, trimmed only with a narrow ribbon of sky-blue sarcenet, was already wilting in the heat, but her spine was straight as a ramrod. "Mr. Thorne." He turned. The smile froze on his handsome face. Penelope did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The anteroom had gone quiet. 3 dowagers in turbans leaned in like hawks. "You dismissed my dearest friend's poetry as sentimental nonsense, sir. How very confident of you. Especially when your own essay in last month's Quarterly, the one on the moral duty of the landed classes, rests upon no fewer than 3 logical fallacies, commits 2 unpardonable grammatical errors in the opening paragraph alone, and displays a prose style so coldly elegant it suggests the author has never once been moved by a genuine human emotion in his entire life." Thorne's blue eyes widened. No one spoke to him thus. "Miss Wright," he began, tone glacial, "you go too far." "Do I?" She lifted her chin. "Or do I merely follow the truth where it leads? Your first fallacy. You assume that because a gentleman holds land, he must therefore feel its moral weight. Yet you offer no evidence beyond your own assertion. Your second. You conflate inherited wealth with moral superiority, ignoring every example from the late war where younger sons and tradesmen showed greater virtue than their titled elders. And the grammar, sir, the sentence beginning, "It behooves the proprietor," is a monstrosity. One does not behove a thing, one is behooved to it. As for emotion, she gave a small, pitying smile. Your paragraphs on charity read as though written by a marble statue, cold, perfect, utterly dead. For 3 full minutes, the anteroom held its breath. Thorne's friends had the grace to look anywhere but at him. Penelope waited, heart hammering against her stays, knowing she had just committed social suicide in the most public fashion possible. Thorne's jaw tightened. A muscle ticked at the corner of his mouth. Then, to her astonishment, the faintest spark of something, fury, fascination she could not tell, lit behind his eyes. "Miss Wright," he said softly, dangerously, "you will hear from me tomorrow." He bowed, perfect, icy, and walked away. That was the moment everything changed. Before we return to the very beginning of that extraordinary evening and discover how a modest young lady from Harley Street came to flay the Ton's darling in public, I must ask you a favour. I am Jane, and I tell stories, and you are welcome to my channel. Now, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city below, I read every single one. Stay with me until the final candlelit scene at that political lecture in May. I promise you the public declaration, the near ruin, the quiet humour, the hard-won happy ending, and the married life that scandalizes every dinner party in Mayfair. You will not regret a single minute. Let us go back to the beginning. Harley Street, London. The same morning. Miss Penelope Wright sat at the small writing desk in the front parlour of her father's rented house, a modest but respectable establishment costing Sir Reginald Wright 250 guineas a year. The fire had been lit at 7 o'clock, with sea coal bought at 18 shillings the chaldron. The room smelled of ink and the faint lavender of the pomander hanging from the window sash. Outside, a hackney coach rattled past, the driver charging the usual 2 shillings and sixpence for the short journey from Oxford Street. Penelope was 23, possessed of a respectable portion of £3,000 settled upon her by her late grandmother, and a mind her mother despaired of. Sir Reginald called her "my little blue stocking" with affection. Lady Wright called her unmarriageable with despair. This morning she was copying out a fair version of a letter to her dearest friend, Miss Amelia Langford, whose privately printed volume of verse, Sonnets from a Young Lady, had appeared only the week before at the modest price of 5 shillings from a printer in Paternoster Row. A knock sounded. The footman, only one, and hired for the season at 12 guineas, entered with the Morning Post. Among the usual cards was a fresh copy of the Quarterly Review for March. Penelope opened it at once to the essay signed J.T., Mr. Julian Thorne's latest offering on the moral obligations of property. She read it twice. By the second reading, her lips were pressed into a thin line. "Insufferable," she murmured. "Utterly insufferable." That evening the family coach, hired for the night at 4 shillings and sixpence, carried them the 23 minutes to Lord Hartwell's residence in Berkeley Square. Penelope wore her best white muslin, the blue sash her only extravagance. Amelia was there, pink-cheeked and hopeful, clutching a copy of her own book. They had promised each other they would enjoy the ball without expectation. They had not expected Mr. Thorne. The overhearing happened quite by accident. Penelope had stepped away to fetch Amelia a glass of orgeat from the refreshment room when she passed the alcove. The words drifted out. The contempt in his voice was unmistakable. She had not planned the confrontation. But when the moment came, the words simply arrived, precise, merciless, and she realized with a tiny thrill, completely accurate. The following morning at 10:30, precisely the hour when morning calls were expected, Mr. Julian Thorne's curricle drew up outside the Wrights' door. The matched bays had cost him 80 guineas apiece at Tattersall's the previous autumn. He wore a driving coat of drab cloth with 6 capes, a beaver hat, and an expression that suggested he had not slept. The parlour was the same modest room. Penelope received him alone. Her mother hovered in the adjoining dressing room with the door ajar, propriety satisfied, but ears wide open. Thorne did not sit. He stood before the empty grate, gloved hands clenched behind his back. "I have come for an apology, Miss Wright." Penelope, seated on the sofa in a morning gown of sprigged muslin, looked up from her embroidery frame. "Then you will leave disappointed, sir. I spoke only the truth. If the truth offends you, the fault lies not with my tongue, but with your essays." He stared. "You criticized my grammar. And your logic. And your prose. All 3 were defective." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "No one has ever dared speak to me so." "Perhaps that explains the defects." Silence stretched. Then, astonishingly, the corner of his mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. 3 hours, Miss Wright. That is how long I sat last night rereading my own words with your voice in my ear. I found the fallacies. I found the grammatical errors. I even began to suspect you might be right about the prose. Penelope lifted an eyebrow. Only began? He laughed then, a short, surprised bark that seemed to startle him more than her. You are the most infuriating woman I have ever met. And you, Mr. Thorne, are the most overpraised. Shall we continue the discussion? Or have you come merely to demand the apology you will not receive? They argued for 3 hours. The tea grew cold in the pot. Lady Wright sent in seed cake and retreated again. By the time Thorne's curricle rattled away at 1:30, he had defended every paragraph, conceded 3 points, and asked, almost shyly, whether she would be at Lady Jersey's rout the following Tuesday. She would. The courtship that followed was unlike any the Ton had ever witnessed. At Lady Jersey's rout in Brook Street, carriage journey 17 minutes, fare 3 shillings, they debated the corn laws over ices. Penelope called the new legislation a tax upon the poor to line the pockets of the already rich. Thorne, whose family owned 3,000 acres in Hampshire, bristled, then listened. By the end of the evening, he had admitted the price of bread was indeed too high for the weavers of Spitalfields. In Hyde Park at the fashionable hour, they rode side by side. Penelope on a hired hack at 5 shillings per hour, Thorne on his favourite black gelding. She criticised his seat. You ride as though the horse is an ornament, sir, not a living creature. And the way he spoke to his groom. The man has a name, Mr. Thorne. Use it. He defended himself, then changed the groom's wages from 12 to 15 guineas a year the next day. At a musicale in Portman Square, they argued for 40 minutes in the supper room about the proper use of the semicolon. The hostess later told her friends the pair had nearly come to blows over punctuation, but both had looked happier than anyone had seen them in years. Julian began to improve, quietly, almost secretly. He rewrote his next essay, sent the proof to Penelope for comment, and published only after she had marked it in red ink with the ruthless precision of a governess. He started reading the radical pamphlets she recommended, tucked discreetly inside copies of the Ladies' Magazine. He even changed the way he spoke of his horses. All the while his mother watched. Lady Thorne, widow of the late Sir Henry Thorne, baronet, lived in some state in a house in Cavendish Square. She summoned her son one afternoon in early May. Julian, you cannot be serious. The girl has £3,000 and a father who is merely a baronet of the most modest consequence. I have spoken with Lady Sefton. There is an heiress, Miss Caroline Beckford, 20,000 a year, and connections to the Duke of Devonshire. You will offer for her at once. Julian stood by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. I will not. His mother's teacup rattled in its saucer. You will be cut off. Then I shall live on the income from my grandmother's trust, 400 a year, and write essays for the reviews. Miss Wright has already shown me how to make them worth reading. Lady Thorne's face was white with fury. You would throw away everything for a sharp-tongued nobody. Yes, he said simply. I would. The climax came at a public lecture held on the 23rd of May at the rooms of the London Institution in Finsbury Circus. The subject was the necessity of parliamentary reform, a topic still daring in 1816. Tickets cost 5 shillings each. The hall was packed with gentlemen, a few daring ladies, and several radicals who had walked from the city. Penelope sat near the front in a simple pelisse of grey kerseymere, her mother beside her, looking faint. Julian had not told her he would attend. The lecturer droned. Then questions were invited. Julian rose. Every head turned. The golden boy of the Ton, standing in a lecture hall among radicals. He spoke for 10 minutes. He defended the right of every Englishman, and every Englishwoman, to expect justice from Parliament. He quoted Penelope's own words back at the audience, though he gave her no credit by name. He denounced the expectations of his own class. He announced, in a clear, carrying voice, that he intended to marry Miss Penelope Wright, who possessed no fortune worth mentioning and a mind worth more than every guinea in the kingdom. A ripple of shock ran through the room. Lady Thorne, seated at the back, rose and swept out. When the lecture ended, Julian walked straight to Penelope, took her gloved hand before 200 witnesses, and said, loud enough for all to hear, "I have spent the last 6 weeks learning how to deserve you, Miss Wright. If you will have me, I shall spend the rest of my life continuing the lesson." Penelope's eyes shone. "You are still grammatically suspect in paragraph 3 of your last essay, Mr. Thorne." He grinned, the first open, boyish grin anyone had seen from him in years. "Then you had better marry me and correct me daily." She laughed. "I will." They were married by special, license on the 14th of June, 1816 at St. George's, Hanover Square. The wedding breakfast cost Sir Reginald Wright 73 guineas. The cake alone was 12 shillings the pound. Lady Thorne did not attend, but sent a silver epergne and a curt note. Within a year, the Thornes had become the couple every hostess dreaded and secretly longed to seat together. At dinner parties, they argued about politics, poetry, horseflesh, and the correct placement of the semicolon. They never raised their voices. They simply sharpened their wits on each other like a pair of dueling foils. One evening at a ball given by the new Duke of Ashford, a dowager leaned across the table and whispered loudly, "The Thornes are at it again. One wonders they do not exhaust one another." Penelope, catching the remark, smiled sweetly and replied, "On the contrary, madam, we find it most invigorating." Julian lifted his glass to her across the candles. "To never stopping, my love." She touched her glass to his. "To never stopping." And in the moonlight that flooded the carriage on the short drive home, 12 minutes, 2 shillings and 6pence, they continued their favourite argument all the way to their new house in Upper Brook Street, laughing between every point. They were happy. They never stopped talking. They never stopped challenging. They never stopped learning each other. And that, dear friends, is the truest romance of all.